It's really interesting to think about how much we actually use our mind. Everything we do, every second of the day, even when we're asleep, our mind's doing something for us. And more often than not, it's getting us into trouble. So what I want to do for this presentation is I want to help you to understand just how troublesome our mind can be in terms of taking us in directions that we most probably don't want to go and stopping us from going in directions that we might need to go. Right now in front of you, there's an image on the screen. I want you to look at that. I want you to think about what it is. Quite often when people look at it, they'll tell me they see a map, spilt ink, planets, turtle, baby's hand, baby's foot, a whole range of things like that. And yet, it's a very distinct picture of something that we're very familiar with. So if I was to tell you that it was a picture of a cow, I wonder if you could see it right there. It's actually staring right at you. Right. So if you look at the screen, 3/4 of the way up, you've got two black dots. That's the ears of the cow. Just in from those two black areas are the two round eyes. And then you come right down to the very front of the bottom of the middle, and you can see the nose of the cow. And it's a cow just looking straight at you. Hopefully you've already seen that. If not, come back to it and have a look. The main point that I was trying to make was that even when something that we recognize in our everyday life is staring right at us, we don't always recognize it. That's a real problem for us, and hopefully as we move through here, the challenges associated with this are going to become a little bit more apparent. Let's start with a blank screen. I want you to get a pen. So if you don't have a pen and paper in front of you, just stop the video and go off and get that, assuming that you've already got it. So let me run through. I want you to write down the first thing that comes into your mind. I'm going to go really quickly, so you're not going to get a chance to sort of think about this, even though you can replay it. If you did it in real life, you'd have roughly 10 seconds to write down 10 things. Okay? So don't think it, just write down whatever's the first thing that's coming into your mind. You ready? Let's go. First thing that comes into your mind when I say the word Coke, the word Jaguar, the word nugget, the word falcon. Give me a colour, give me a number between 1 and 10, piece of furniture, and give me a flower. So, I wonder how you did there. Let me show you where that tends to work out. What it tends to be is that people will give me something that relates to Coca-Cola, even though Coke is a fossil fuel. And then it could be cocaine, couldn't it? It could be a drug, right? But we tend to go to Coca-Cola. Someone spent a few $1 billion getting us our mind to go there before it goes to the fossil fuels. With a Jaguar, you still get a lot of people who will write down something to do with a car, even though it's a wild cat. Nugget, we tend to get people writing down things that look like food, something we might get, chicken nuggets. But it's gold, isn't it? A nugget is gold. But not too many people write that down, and even less people write down shoe polish, right? Because we used to think about getting some nugget onto our shoes. In an Australian context, when I ask for a falcon, a lot of people will write down a car because, again, there's an organisation that spent hundreds of millions of dollars trying to get us to be very familiar with the notion of a Ford Falcon, when of course it's a bird of prey. When I ask for a colour, most people give me a red or a blue, a number, a 3 or a 7. Furniture tends to be a chair, and more often than not in a traditional Australian context, we get a rose. If that's worked for you, in the sense that you've found yourself defaulting to many of these things, then that also shows you the challenge we have in that our brains are defaulting constantly, automatically to something that someone else has most probably had some influence around. Let's try something else. What I want you to do is just look into this black screen here, and I'm going to allow you to witness something that I think is pretty special. It's an illusion, and it's an illusion done by David Copperfield. Although this is just a very ordinary program that you're watching on a video, he believes he can tell via this computer screen what you've been thinking. So in front of you, you've got these 6 cards. What he wants you to do is to look deeply into one card. Try and burn the image of one card into your mind. All right? So just think about one card. He's going to try and find this card. So trust that you've picked out a card. So now what he wants you to do is to look deeply into his eyes and to keep that card in your mind. What particular card was it? Okay. So he's taken your card, right? The card you were thinking of no longer exists. So how did he do that? How did he take your card? So what's he done there? If you haven't been able to work that out, it's because your mind has defaulted to trying to work out what the problem is here without thinking about the boundaries. So if you see 6 cards and he takes away one card and he shows you 5 other cards, it looks like he took your card. But what if he took away all of the 6 cards and then introduced 5 of the other 6 cards which he could have shown you in the first place as well, to make it look like he's taken away? So the issue here is, if you think this is about 6 cards, you'll never solve it. The boundaries of this problem relate to 12 cards. And once you realize that, it's a pretty easy thing to solve. The challenge for us all, of course, is that creativity is something which can be demonstrated in all walks of life. We've got people who are brilliant orators, brilliant sports people, musicians, naturalists like Darwin, his ability to convince the world of a different account of how life came to be, really if you're using metaphors and analogies. Musicians, mathematicians. It's an amazing thing, and we even know now that we have so many different types of ways in which our brain can demonstrate intelligence. There's mathematical, spatial, bodily, musical, naturalists, impersonal, intrapersonal, and of course the verbal, linguistic. It's quite an amazing process that we go through. And we can even think, when we go beyond these types of multiple intelligences which were introduced to us by Howard Gardner, to his more later thinking on the 5 different types of brains. That's a really interesting way to also think about the nature of brains. So let's have your pen at the ready again. And what I want you to think about now is, if one word captures this image, what is that one word? Some people just get it instantly. Other people have to really try and force it. So let me give you a hint if you haven't got it. What's on the screen? We've got a picture of a fan and we've got a daisy. So what might you get from that? Some people will just come straight to fantasy. That's all they see, fantasy. So there's a challenge for you. Other people would much prefer that we dealt with the maths. So, how much is X? 4? Yep, not too much of a problem. How much is X now? Starts to get a bit harder, doesn't it? But maybe you've got 1.5. Yeah? How much is X now? And now it just gets harder and harder, even though we're still talking about 2. X is equal to 2, right? So maybe for you, you'd prefer to look at images rather than numbers, right? That gives you a bit of an inclination as to which way your brain may be directing you in terms of its default positions. What about here? When you look at this image on the screen, what is it you see? If you see something moving, then your brain is playing a trick on you, because nothing's moving. And the easiest way to know that is to simply look at any one of the images circles that you think is moving, and if you look directly at that, you'll notice that it doesn't move. It's only that peripheral vision which starts playing those tricks. Likewise here, how many black dots can you find on the page? Because the interesting thing is there are no black dots. Again, your mind is playing that trick. I want you to say out loud what shape you see when I bring up the next image, okay? So be ready to say it. You're the only one who's going to hear it. It's pretty cool doing this, of course, when you've got 100 students in front of you. What shape do you see when I bring up this image? Now, if you're like 99% of the population, you just said triangle. And of course, there's no triangle here, is there? We've got 3 Pac-Man shapes, but we've got no triangles. So we've got a real challenge here. Our brain is making a fool of us. And this is the same brain that we rely on to make important decisions every minute of the day. We go to school, we spend a lot of time learning to read and write. Have a read through these. I asked them to stop kicking a football around. The next thing I knew, I was on the ground being kicked in the face. He looked a reasonable type in his smart suit until I said his ticket wasn't valid. Pushed me, I thought he was going to kick me. How can it be, having spent all of this time trying to learn how to read and write, that our brain says, doesn't matter, I can handle all of this, I can roll through it for you? Yeah? So we've got some real challenges here. And the more we understand these challenges, the easier it is for us to understand how we interact with other people and how it is we go about making decisions. One of the big challenges we have is that our brains are just simply amazing. We go to a high school reunion and we can see people. Much easier now with Facebook, of course, but even before Facebook, we could see a pattern in someone's face, the way that someone walks, the way that someone talks. We hear a piece of music on the radio. Da, 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 da. We only have to hear 1 second and we automatically pick up on that pattern and we complete it and we say, that's this song. We see patterns that we can correct, and we see things that are visually ambiguous, like this duck, or is it a rabbit, right? It's pretty amazing what our brains can do. For a lot of people, we like to think about our brains as having this left or right leaning, and there's something to that, but what we do know is that our brains aren't either left or either right. They're both. They're a combination of these things, and while one may have a lean towards it, its strength, the strength of the left brain, is determined by the ability of the right brain, and vice versa. So there's no point having a right brain where you're great at intuition and random things and really holistic if you can't do any crosswords and you can't pay attention to detail sometime, because all of that ability flows back to the right. And likewise, what you've got in your right flows back to help the left. So it's really important to understand that. One of the real challenges we have is that our brain makes all of the decisions for us all the time on automatic. You're driving down the road, you don't actually think, will I change to third gear now? Your brain simply says, I recognise the pattern, whether it's the speed of the car, the noise of the engine. Your brain already knows to do that. You don't have to actually consciously make that decision. Your brain does it for you. And here's where the challenge is. We rely on our brain to be this unbelievable self-organising system, to make all of these complexities of the world that we have coming our way, these patterns of perceptions which we absorb. We rely on it, we're very lazy, we allow it to happen, and that's why at the very beginning of this video there were a lot of things that would have tricked you up, right? Because you weren't using your brain was just simply going along with you, right? It was on automatic pilot. So our challenge is, how do we snap out of this process and get to a point where we can actually be in control of this process ourselves? The process of creative problem solving requires 4 things to happen. It requires that we're able to define a problem, that we're able to generate ideas, that we can evaluate the ideas, and that we can sell them to other people. And it's this process of selling that I want to talk to you in more depth today. One of the reasons why people find it hard to be creative, and they do, is because it requires these 2 different sides of the brain. The left-hand side of the brain that works really well with judgment is what we use in first step, where we're going to really define a problem. Otherwise, we don't want to be dealing with something we think is 6 cards when it's actually 12 cards, right? Otherwise, David Copperfield will have us confused forever. And once we've got some ideas, we want to be able to evaluate those using some sort of logical process. But the real challenge we have most of the time is being able to generate the ideas. You know, the other day I would put my head over the fence here near my house, and my neighbour has thousands and thousands and thousands of ladders. And once a month, when the moon's full, he stacks these ladders up and he starts heading off up into the sky. And I always say to him, "Hey Bob, where are you going?" You know, and he's got hundreds and hundreds of ladders all stacked, and he's going up this ladder, and he turns around to me and he says, "Hey Cole, you know what?" Now, hopefully, you just thought I was trying to tell you a joke, right? And if you did think that I was trying to tell you a joke, you would have suspended judgment. You weren't sitting there going, "That's bullshit. There's no way that guy's got thousands of ladders and once a month he's stacking them up to go up to the moon." You thought, he's still on a joke here. Right. Where's that going to end? The only time that your brain will naturally suspend judgment is when you think you're hearing a joke. Otherwise, you've got skin in the game and you're going to make a judgment. And sometimes we do that when someone simply walks through the door. Someone we don't particularly like walks through the door, and before they've even opened their mouth, we've already made a judgment that we don't want to know what they've got to say. And this makes it very hard for us to communicate with people in a profitable way. So this process here of generating new ideas requires us to find techniques and do things, lateral thinking, reverse logics. De Bono has many great ideas here. His book, Serious Creativity, is all you need to really set yourself up in that space. But we need to find a circuit breaker that allows us to suspend judgment, just like we would if someone was telling us a joke, so that we get enough ideas generated so that we can actually bring our evaluation and judgment back in. But even when we've done that, we've still got to be able to sell this solution to people. When I first started at university, I'd come from a business background, and one of the first things that I read was this statement: marketing is not selling. And I thought, that's pretty confusing, because I've just spent the last 12, 15 years of my life thinking that marketing was a process of selling something. And I found myself obviously in disagreement with what I understand what the book was trying to say. It was saying selling is a basic thing that everyone can do, and marketing is a science, right? The reality is we're all selling things to people all the time. I'm selling you something right now, right? And if you were to use any of this information, you'd be going off to try and sell something to someone else. Our children sell us ideas every day. Everybody's trying to sell something. It's just that not everyone's very good at doing it. Here's the challenge. If we all speak the same language, how come we don't always understand each other? Just think that through. If we all speak the same language, let's call it English, how come we don't always understand each other? One of the big challenges we've got is that we have a personality that differs from other people. This is derived from our temperament. And you can argue that we get that at that moment of conception, when our parents create us. They pass on this unique DNA to us, which is intricately linked to themselves and their ancestors. And it provides us with a predisposition. And this disposition that we start to reveal as our character helps us to form habits of life, ways in which we are comfortable to behave. We're outward-going, we're shy, whatever it may be. And these habits of life are also influenced by the nature of the environments that we engage with. We could be an international student, we could be young, we could be at work, we could be at home. Different types of environments that enable us to reveal different habits of life. What I want to take you into now is sitting sort of around the just above the top of this line here. Galen's 4 temperaments: sanguine, choleric, melancholy, and phlegmatic. I've got no doubt that you've come across Myers-Briggs processes, which are down here in the blue at the bottom. No doubt that you've come across those. So why would I want to show you something that seems to be a bit outdated? The reason I want to show you something that's a bit outdated is because it's so easy to digest. It's so easy for people to pick up. It's so easy for people to use. And so if you're trying to help people, why would you give them something that's so complicated that they can't use it, right? They might be interested in it, but if they can't use it, they'll lose their interest pretty quickly. And that's the big problem with Myers-Briggs. We can identify ourselves as one of the 16 types of temperaments that are possible, but it's almost impossible to then look at the other 10 people in the room and work out what they are, and even if they've told you what they are, to remember. And even if they've told you and you've remembered, to remember all the different aspects and aspects of those different temperaments. Whereas when we start to think about the blend that we are, we're a little bit of sanguine and some choleric, or whatever else we might be, and we'll get to that in a minute, it makes it much easier for us to see and recognize and understand other people. Over your life journey, when you're most sorely tested, the answers you'll find relate directly to what you have left in you after you've lost everything outside of yourself. Having lost everything outside of myself once, and hopefully I'll never do it a second time, I came across this saying, and it really helped me to pick myself up and realize, wow, I've got a sense of humor, I've got my health, touch wood, and I've got confidence that I can create value. Those three things are worth more than anything I could have on the outside. Anything. And so once you start to realize what you've got that's of great value, you can start to understand the invisible stuff. And it's the invisible stuff that we're trying to influence when we're working with people. Not the obvious thing that we can see. Someone's grumpy, someone's this, someone's that. No, it's everything underneath where the automatic processing of their brain is. Because at that level, that is what we need to influence or connect to if we're going to be successful in selling our ideas and solutions to other people. So we can think about these 4 temperaments this way. Yellow is sanguine. Blue, down the bottom left-hand corner, is your phlegmatic. Choleric is the red up the top. And we have the pink, mauve, melancholy. And what I'm suggesting to you here is that when we deal with different blends of people, and these things are blended, we'll talk about that in a minute, we need to be able to understand that not everyone is going to view an opportunity for action the same way. Let's say there is a need to do something. Well, sanguine people might want to jump in. They've got lots of imagination and flexibility around what we might be able to do, but they want to really have a breakthrough in how we're actually going to do this. Whereas the cholerics, they want to be in charge of the process. They want to measure this success. They want to extend on what we've already done. So maybe more moderate results are after. The melancholy people, well, typically they want incremental results. They annoy people because they can be quite rigid on how they're going to do this, but they're fantastic problem solvers, but they can be a bit risk averse. Whereas our phlegmatic people, they tend to want moderate results initially, but they want us to do it together. They want us to reflect and take our time on this, not to rush it. So we've got these really different types of personalities that we can adjust our pitch to. They're all buying something quite different, right? We'll talk more about that in a minute. It's really important that we understand they're all buying, might be the same thing, but they're buying a different version of that same thing. And so we can think about the relationship between sanguines and cholerics as being what we call blood brothers, just as it is across the bottom for the phlegmatics and the melancholies. So if you do your test, four temperaments test, you're more likely to come out with a blend of sanguine and choleric than you are sanguine and phlegmatic. Certainly you're not going to come up with a great blend of sanguine and melancholy. It's very hard for people to understand where you're coming from if that's where you're at. And we can also think in terms of these kissing cousins. So smaller connections that we have as we go down the sides. So you might find, like in my case, I'm a sanguine with a good amount of choleric and a healthy amount of phlegmatic, but not much melancholy. So I really do dislike processes, whereas other people who like processes most probably get nervous when I'm around because I really just want to throw the baby out with the bathwater and get started. So you can sort of, I'd hopefully identify aspects of yourself here in terms of these different types of dispositions. If you're sanguine, maybe people see you as being pretty carefree, lively, talkative, storytelling. If you're melancholy, maybe people will see you as being a bit pessimistic, sober, right, quiet. The real challenge here is that everyone thinks, I want to be the choleric or the sanguine. Up until the 44th president, and I don't say that with any reference or meaning to the 45th, I just don't have that data. Up until the 44th president, they were all equally spread across all four of these. So being phlegmatic or melancholy or whatever doesn't mean you can or can't lead, right? It's how you recognize those aspects of yourself and how you use those aspects of yourself. So it looks a little bit like this. We've got the sanguine and the phlegmatic on one side, and they like to play. We've got the sanguine and the choleric across the top, and they like to lead. We've got the choleric and the melancholy down one side, and they like to work. And we've got the phlegmatic and the melancholy across the bottom, and they like to analyse. You'll notice there's no E on analyse. When I made this slide many years ago, I realised after I put it up that I'd missed the E. But in true sanguine form, I thought, stuff it. I'll leave it off because it's a good example of the sanguine at work. It doesn't matter. You already know what the word is. You don't need an E on the end of it for it to be anything other than analyse, right? So to the extent that you've got that sanguine phlegmatic, people see you as maybe as being a bit witty, easygoing, but maybe not so much goal-oriented. On the other side, we've got people who are decisive, organised and goal-oriented. Alternatively, we've got this across the top, this optimistic, outgoing, outspoken, versus the introverted, pessimistic, softly spoken. When you're selling something to the sanguine people, you're selling the social aspect of it. You're selling something that relates to the lack of rules, the opportunities. Imagine. It's a great word. When you want to sell to a sanguine person, it's a great way to start. Imagine yourself doing this. Imagine this. Because they can live in the future. They can imagine the future really easily. Whereas with a melancholy person, they don't want to imagine. They want data. They want some facts and figures. They want to build on precedent. They want to know that they're on some sort of firm footing. All right. Whereas with the choleric, very hard to sell the choleric person because the choleric person wants to make the decisions all by themselves. They don't want to be sold, and so you really got to give them the room to go off and make their own mind up. With the phlegmatic person, we really are selling safety. We're selling community. We're selling family. We're selling everything that relates to doing things together. So, how would you recognize these people? Well, if you were to walk into the office of a sanguine person, it'd be pretty messy. There might be some trinkets that relate to social activities, maybe a picture of a nice holiday they've been on or time they've spent with friends on a weekend or at the pub or whatever it might be. But that'd be a bit lived in and be a sense of relaxed fun. Walk into an office for the phlegmatic person and you would get a very homely feel, right? Maybe there's a coffee cup still sitting on the side of the bench. Maybe there's some pictures of the family. Maybe the place looks a little bit lived in. There's a cardigan or a piece of clothing which just hasn't been returned home yet because the office sort of feels like an extension of their home. If we were to go to the choleric's office, we might find only one thing at a time on the desk because they've got this level of organisation. And the certificates on the wall all talk about achievement, excellence, things that have been attempted and successfully completed. If we went into the melancholy's office, we may see nothing other than just what needs to be there for the work to be completed. There are lots of ways to build up a profiling process, and that's what you need to do. Otherwise your mind will just automatically allow you to default to one way. And remember, if we all speak the same language, how come we all don't understand each other? And it's because we've got these four basic dispositions and blends of them, and it means we have to work out what am I not selling to. So as a sanguine selling to the melancholy, I've got to really turn myself inside out to be successful. and likewise with them to me. Whereas when I'm dealing with the choleric, I understand what they're trying to achieve in terms of the control or the outcomes they want, and I've really got to make it possible for them to make decisions around what I'm doing. Whereas when I'm working with the phlegmatic people, I'm just trying to make them feel part of the process and see the bigger picture for us all. Once we start to identify these different types and what they're buying and what they're not buying, it makes it so much easier for us to be a part of this process. I hope that's helped. And there's plenty of good resources. David Kersey's work in this area, Please Understand Me, I think that's an excellent book. If you just look up sanguine, choleric, phlegmatic, melancholy online, you'll find tests for that, and you'll also find lots of background information. I think that's really useful. But ultimately, it's about getting people to understand that their brains are going to be on automatic pilot. It's what we pay them the big bucks for, to actually take all the complexity out of the world. The problem is, even the simplest things that we want to do in life get stuffed up by brains that are on automatic pilot. And so we've got to be able to unconnect them, bring them back, allow ourselves to be in the driving seat, and enable us to see the differences that people have in the way that they make their decisions, so that we can alter the way we pitch ideas to them. And when we do that, we give ourselves a great chance of success.